Hey there, Algebra 1 students. We're going to spend a little bit of time practicing writing an expression from sort of a word problem here. And so we have one that we did in class as part of our pass and play review. Um, the first thing I'm going to try to do is just critically read it, and I'm going to think through it by finding some of the important information. I'm going to go ahead and get my highlighter ready because that's what I'm going to do to find the important information. So to work together, Mr. Bostwick, Mr. McSparron, and Mrs. Sleeth make copies for one another. They've already made a total of 2,160 copies. That seems like it's probably going to be important. 2,160 copies for Algebra 1 students at Battle High School. This week, Mrs. Sleeth made 85 copies for Mr. Bostwick, 90 for Mr. McSparron, and 180 for herself for a single lesson. Write an expression that gives the total number of copies made for the year after some number of lessons L. Okay, so when I'm thinking about this, when we're writing I'm going to call this a linear expression, you have to find the stuff that stays the same and the stuff that changes. So I'm going to put here sort of the starting point, and you don't have to write all this every time, but I'm just trying to give you a visual to help you think through it. Starting point and stuff that changes. Okay, so the starting point is really the first piece of information there. That's 2,160 copies. That's the starting point. We have 2,160 copies at our disposal already. All right, so those are there. Those aren't going away, but we are going to make more copies per lesson. And so that's something that's changing. So let's look at how it's changing. I'm thinking, well, every lesson we need 85 for Mr. Bostwick, and we need 90 for Mr. McSparron, and 180 for Mrs. Sleeth. And so we have these three things. Every time we have a new lesson, we have to make all of these copies so that all of our students have a copy of something. And so that's how much is changing. Every time we make a new lesson, we have already made 2,160 copies, which I don't need to write copies here, but I'm going to start writing my expression. 2,160 copies, and every time I do a new lesson, for that lesson, I'm going to add to it 85 copies for Mr. Bostwick, plus 90 copies for Mr. McSparron, plus 180 copies for Mrs. Sleeth, and that is per lesson. So all of these things, these are new copies per lesson. And because this is the stuff that's changing, it should end up as a coefficient. And that's because it's the rate. Stuff that changes is the rate. And so when we're thinking about the expression for this situation, it's got to tell us what we already have, 2,160 copies. That is highlighted in green here. And then the stuff that we are adding each time is highlighted here. And so we start at 2,160. Every new lesson we add 85 plus 90 plus 180 copies, and we multiply that by the number of lessons to find out the total copies for the whole year. Now you can go ahead and do this arithmetic here. So 85 plus 90 plus 180 is 355, I believe. And so a nice clean expression for us, nice and simplified, is 2,160 plus 355L. And that's a review of how to make an expression from a written problem.